Good afternoon, good afternoon. This is the Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON. I'm Cliff Kelly, and of course it is TGIF Day. It is Friday, June 28th, and we are on iHeartRadio, so if you have a smartphone or a tablet, simply download the iHeartRadio app and take us wherever you might be. And remember, you can always listen live at WVON.com, and when you do that, we always ask that you participate in the daily listener poll and also view our current video. And also, of course, you can call us direct at 591-1690, 591-1690. I want to remind you that the murder trial of George Zimmerman is streaming live on WVON.com when court is in session. You can go to WVON.com and click on the Justice for Trayvon banner to watch it. And, of course, we would like you to do that. All right. Well, it's Friday. This is the Cliffhanger Roundtable, the Cliffhanger Roundtable. And what we want to talk about is the N-word, the N-word. Some people have been saying, the latest with Paula Deen, you know, it goes on and on. There's different people that say different things, obviously. This will blow over, and then you'll have somebody else to say something crazy. It's happened over the years. But some people are saying, who gains from that, these people being attacked? That the people who are referred to in the N-word are still losing. We're losing schools, we're losing mental health clinics, we're losing housing, we're losing jobs. So I guess what a lot of folks are saying, yeah, this happens, but what's the bottom line? Who benefits? Who benefits by it, if anyone? Some people are, of course, ostracized. They lose their jobs temporarily. We can go down ad infinitum and talk about that when people make comments about black athletes, for instance, you know who I'm talking about. They're off from work for a couple of weeks or maybe a month or two, and then they're back. So is the N-word more valuable than black people? We've got two experts on our line we are pleased to have with us, and of course you're welcome to join us at 591-1690. We have Dr. Neal Lester. Dr. Lester is a professor of English. He's been a professor of English at Arizona State since the fall of 1997. His area of specialization is African American literacy and cultural studies. Dr. Lester earned his BA in English from the State University of West Georgia and his MA and PhD in English at Vanderbilt University, and he has published on and taught courses in African Americans children's literature. And one of them that's very interesting is that he wrote about the absence of the word nigger in contemporary African-American children's text. Dr. Lester, thank you so much for joining us on WVON.
Well, thank you for including me in this important conversation.
I appreciate you, sir. Also joining us is Dr. Lavelle Anderson, who is an assistant professor of philosophy at the University of Memphis, and he works on the semantics and ethics of racial slurs and racist language, and also on racial humor. Dr. Anderson, Professor, thank you so much for joining us also.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Say hello to each other, okay?
All right, sir.
Okay. Listen, let's start with you, Dr. Lester. How can you respond to the situation that I just mentioned? Paula Deen is the latest example. She's being attacked. Although some African Americans are saying, you know, what she did isn't so bad. She's talked to some people who are saying that, you know, what's the big deal? But even when they are attacked, when they say this, when I say they, I'm meaning Dean and all others.
Mm-hmm.
Do black people benefit by it at all, or what happens? And usually these people who say that go right back to where they were.
Well, and Paula Deen will go back to work. I mean, on the other hand, it will resurrect the specter of race. Your initial question about, you know, is the N-word more valuable than black people? I guess in my research and my teaching, I find that those are inextricably connected, that the N-word is connected to black bodies and the value or the valueless place that we associate with naming and bodies and treatment and all those kinds of things. So in many ways, I don't see those as disconnected as one is more valuable than the other. I think this reminds us what that value is.
Very good. The same question for Professor Anderson?
Oh, yeah, I quite agree that attacks on the word itself, when people use them, I think in the end they have a sort of counterproductive aim, right? So that when we attack people like Paula Dean or others who might use these expressions, what it does, it takes the focus off the conditions of black folk themselves and places it just on the word, right? So that we take the focus off the people to whom the word is attached and just look at particular linguistic practices.
Well, and I'd add that that actually, in my teaching, what I find is that the word is rarely about a word. Word is about context. In the same way that Paula Dean may have used that word X number of years ago, what's equally important is how we have learned about this. It's through these public records of a racial harassment suit and these other kinds of things about plantation-themed weddings that sort of speak to an issue that is larger than the word. The word is only a symptom of these other things. Dr. Laura can mention the word, Dr. Laura Schlesinger can mention the word, but then on top of that, she talks about black people having a chip on their shoulders, or now that now that America has a black president, then, black people should sort of get over this notion of racism. Those are much bigger than the word. The word is just a symptom of these larger issues that involve black people and black bodies.
So you're saying then, Dr. Lester, that this is something that's overblown, that we're really skipping, as Professor Anderson says, it takes the focus off of our real problems?
Oh, absolutely not overblown. I think language is about how we think, and how we think controls how we act. And I think what it shows is that we're not quite as racially progressive as we think we are. And I heard one other panelist on another show say that, even this notion of apologizing, because people who sort of fall into traps can apologize, and if they can talk to Jesse Jackson, they're forgiven and they move back to life. It may not be quite as happily ever after, but there is a sense that it reminds us that we have not sort of addressed this problem of the color line, even in the 21st century. That's what it reminds. So in that sense, it really is important. It's how we are or are not addressing it. And part of that addressing means that black people, black communities need to address how that word is used among black people, and that is not just a black-white thing.
That's a great point. I was going to ask Professor Anderson that, because you work on the semantics of the ethics of racial slurs and so forth, and racial humor. So I know in doing that, Professor Anderson, you have to talk about people calling each other of the same race the N-word. How does
absolutely.
What impact does that have on black people? Obviously,
Yeah, I think it's a complicated thing, because there are so many different ways in which the word is used among black people themselves, right? So some important work by social linguists like Geneva Smitherin or John Baugh, for example, have looked at the ways in which African American English sort of functions as its own sort of legitimate dialect with its own sort of sets of rules and vocabulary. Right? And I think one thing that gets confused in our discussions about, let's say, the N-word in particular, right? You always get this same sort of question coming up when someone white uses the expression. Well, if black people are using it towards each other, why can't we use it too, right? And the confusion comes in not having any sort of background or familiarity with this African American English and the ways in which certain words function within that dialect. Right? So it would be sort of simplistic to say, well, black people using the N-word towards each other are sort of just, I guess, reproducing, sort of dehumanizing language towards one another. I think it's much more complicated than that.
How do we address that? Because that is exactly what a lot of people have said. I'm sure you both hear that all the time. Either one.
Well, and I'm not so sure that I'm not so sure that Paula Dean and others who allege that they're confused are really confused.
Okay.
If she's 66 years old and a product of the South, she's not confused.
Right.
and I allege that there's not much of a double standard going on, which is what people tend to say, because a number of black people don't use it. A number of efforts have been made, both by the NAACP, both in the mock funeral and efforts with the dictionary to sort of change the definition. So it's not as if black people use the word and white people don't. And I am still trying to work through this notion in the context of language that this word follows the patterns of other ways that black people have twisted, turned, remade, reappropriated some of the words.
Okay. That Professor Neal Lester, Professor Lavelle Anderson are with us. This is the Cliffhanger Roundtable. We are talking about the N-word, obviously. And if you'd like to join us, we'd love your opinion. 591-1690. We'll be back with our great guests right after this.
More intelligent conversation with the governor of talk radio. Your phone calls, traffic, and weather up next on the Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON.
We are continuing our Cliffhanger Roundtable question relative to who loses. When the N-word is used, some people are thinking that the N-word is more important than even black people are more valuable. And we have two experts on this issue. We have Dr. Lavelle Anderson, a professor at University of Memphis, and Dr. Neal Lester, a professor at Vanderbilt University. And we are just pleased to have both of them with us. And let's take a caller for our guests. And thank you, gentlemen. Thank you both for being with us. Let's go to Charles. Charles from Hyde Park. Hi, Charles. Thanks for calling.
Hey, Cliff, how you doing?
Fine, sir. Go right ahead.
I have a question for the professors there. If a black artist puts out a CD or iTunes or whatever, and he uses the N-word in the song, and a white person buys the CD or the tune or whatever, the professor's saying that the white person cannot use the N-word in that song. After the white person has bought the song, he cannot play it or in public, or he cannot repeat the N-word that he hears in the song. I'd like for the professors to answer that.
Okay, all right. Thank you. And let me correct myself. Dr. Lester is a professor at Arizona State.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'll take a stab at that, because I don't recall saying that nobody could use it or that somebody couldn't, because it's not criminal to use that language. What I like to talk about is personal responsibility, and I'd like to go back to that rapper and not assume that all rappers use that language, because all rappers don't. Even those who are in hip-hop don't use the language. About personal choice, which is why we need some critical conversations about this, not about simply who can use it and who can't. Because you can use the language that you want. It's not the same as standing in a crowded theater yelling fire. But there is something about taking critical responsibility for the language that we use to talk about our reality.
Okay. Professor, what do you think on this? You've done a lot on the racial slurs and racial humor and all. Yeah, go right ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I echo much of what Dr. Lester is saying, that when we get into these discussions about who can and who can't use it, a lot is sort of obscured, or we look over a lot of important issues. But I'm reminded of a routine by Chris Rock, in which he talks about that very question, right, where if a white person buys a hip-hop CD, one in which the N-word is being used frequently, and they're sort of singing along, can they go ahead and say the words or not? I guess Rock was of the opinion that they could in the song. They could when they were listening to the song, but of course it was just confined to when they were listening to the song, right? So outside of that, they couldn't use the word. I don't know quite what I think about that. I don't know.
Well, that's potentially dangerous, though, and I do think it comes back to personal responsibility of artists also. And I keep saying this conversation is as much about an examination of black-white race relations as it is about the actions of black people themselves.
What about Dr. Lester?
We take ownership.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because when you talk about that, Doctor, and I'm glad you mentioned it, there was something said by one of our most powerful black entertainers, who is no longer with us, unfortunately, that the Jewish community got upset about, and they had to change the record. You know what I'm talking about? Sue me.
Right.
Yes. You remember that? That shows power. We do not have that power, or we just don't. Or we just don't use it.
Well, it's interesting because I haven't done the extensive work that my colleague on the line has done, but I do know just sort of peripherally that in the histories of comedians like Paul Mooney and Richard Pryor, they chose not to use the word when they saw the potential damage that it was doing in terms of referencing themselves. So again, this is as much about self-reflection. It's not criminal. It's not even criminal to be racist. It's the behavior that's associated with that. So the fact that Paula Deen may be a racist takes us nowhere in a conversation. What it does, however, is to look at patterns of behavior that may be manifested in the ways in which she treats her black employees. So it's still connected, and to somehow say that it has to be spelled differently and it has to be pronounced differently doesn't, to me, kind of address this notion that it's a problematic word. Contextually, historically, I can sort of see that if we're in the Last Poet or if we're reading out loud. But if, for example, you're teaching Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn and a teacher has students reading out loud and they're reading that word, I'd ask, why is that the practice in a classroom if that's all in that novel that you're focusing on? So this is never about the word. It's about all of these sort of contextual ways that the word implies other things about our realities in terms of race relations, both intraracially and interracially.
We'll be back with both of our great guests, Professor Anderson, Professor Lester, and your calls at 591-1690. Stay with us. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We're back. This is the Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON. I'm Cliff Kelly. And we are on iHeartRadio, so if you have a smartphone or a tablet, simply download the iHeartRadio app and enjoy us wherever you might be. And remember, you can always listen live at WVON.com. And when you do, we always ask that you participate in the daily listener poll and view our current video, all right? And you can call us direct at 591-1690. We are in the midst of the cliffhanger, the Friday cliffhanger roundtable, and we are talking about the N-word, and as some people are saying, that which is more valuable, the N-word or black people, because of all the things we're losing and where we aren't going, losing schools, mental health centers here in Chicago, housing. Why are, we aren't treated better when everybody gets so upset about making a derogatory remark and they don't do a lot of things about other things that we should be complaining about. With us, we have two experts. We're so happy to have them. Professor Lowell Anderson, the doctor is a professor of philosophy at the University of Memphis, and he's worked on the semantics and ethics of racial slurs and racist language, and on also racial humor. And also Professor Neal Lester. The doctor is a professor of English at Arizona State University since the fall of '97. And his area of specialization is African American literacy and cultural studies. And he has even done some work on, I don't want to forget this, Professor Lester, in children's literature, or the absence of the N-word in contemporary African American children's text. So before we let you go, make sure we respond to that, okay? Because that's very important. And
all right.
Well, we're so pleased to have them both with us. And let's go right back to the phones. 591-1690 is our number. And Earl is up next from Hyde Park. Thank you for holding, Earl.
Oh, hey, my pleasure. And I'm kind of enjoying this conversation. I'm wondering with your guests, first, two questions. One, do you think because of the media use of the word, and I mean in lyrics and in film, does that add to the complexity or the frequency of the use in common language? And the other, do you think that the rappers and people who use the N-word in media and other conversations, when they try to split the baby by saying that when I use it, I'm taking the sting out of it, I mean something else, and then so it becomes ambiguous, but when the larger majority crowd listens to the word, sometimes they may not get the nuances and so on and so forth, and because they hear it so often, it just might come out inadvertently in the conversation because is prevalent in rap and is prevalent in the film industry. So you want to reflect on that? Do you think it's used more than any of the other derogatory terms that have been used against other groups of people? And do you think the ambiguity with the conversations that black people have kind of tends to fog up the issue? Okay?
All right. Thank you, Earl. Who would like to start? Lavelle, why don't you, Professor Lavelle, since you've done so much work with the semantics of racial slurs and also racial humor, why don't you start on responding to Earl?
Sure. I can. I'll start with the second question first, which I think is the question was, well, when rappers use the word and they try to use it in this, well, I guess the claim is they use it in a nuanced way. Is that nuance lost on its wider audience? Well, actually, so I don't know. I think it might signal sort of changing attitudes with, say, the contemporary generation. Right? So, example, so Tyler, the Creator, who's a young rapper, excuse me, recently did an interview on a New York radio station. So, of course, he's an African American, and they got into a discussion about the N-word and about who could use it, about whether or not white people could use it. And Tyler claimed that the younger generation didn't really care about the baggage that the word had. Right? They were no longer tied to all of the atrocities that the word accompanied. Right? And so for them, when they use the word, they don't hear it in the way that the older generations might hear it. They don't hear it with all of that historical baggage. All they hear is just a word that now represents coolness, I guess. It's been co-modified in a certain kind of way. And when rappers use it, that's all people hear now. And so when you have non-black people who buy hip-hop CDs, they're just using it in this sort of bland, neutral way.
Could that at all be, Professor, could that all be, Professor Anderson, the fact that they may not even be aware of the root causes of why people despise this, or the racist roots of the word?
Oh, yeah, I'm quite sure that's probably doing a lot of the work.
Yeah, because you've got some young people that don't have a clue about our history, which is which is unfortunate. But I'm sure you folks know that. I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead with the second part.
Yeah, go right ahead. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. So that's and with respect to Tyler, I think that's true, and many young people that they either ignorant of the history, or just don't care about it anymore. They think that this is the way they move on. I don't know. But the first question had to do with the use of the word in lyric and film, whether or not that added to the complexity of use, I guess, in ordinary language or ordinary conversations. Actually, I think it works the other way around. I think that, so of course, the nuance and the complexity of the use of the word has been around for a long time, and it predated film and music, or the inclusions in film and music. So you see, even in sort of slave songs, children would use the word to warn of patrollers coming, right? So it has all this different complexity that sort of was there already. And I think its inclusion in films and in music in some ways tries to mirror that in an imperfect kind of way.
I got you. All right. Professor Lester, one of the things, I think this would be a good time for me to bring in what I wanted you to talk about relative, because when we talk about this generational thing, I truly believe, and some young people that I talk to, they don't really even have an idea as to why people think this is a horrible thing. And you have addressed that, and I think this is great in the literacy and the absence of the word in contemporary African American children's texts.
Yeah. Well, let me add two things. First is I think nuance. It's dangerous when we depend on nuance, and I say that in light of Django Unchained and Tarantino's use of the word. And I listened to people who counted it, and I also listened to audience members who were typically sort of high school, or maybe not high school, but certainly college age, who were sort of laughing at a very odd context of American slavery and this sort of, spaghetti Western. So I think nuance, some people miss nuance. They just don't get it. I also have a slightly different experience with younger people, some high schoolers in Mississippi, black and white 11th graders, who in an anonymous survey acknowledge that they recognize that that word has baggage and is problematic. And any young person who is aware of Trayvon Martin knows that there are problems along race lines, and that language and naming black bodies is part of that problem. Relative to the work that I've done in terms of children's text, it was very specifically based on an incident in Brooklyn, New York, where two young black kids were beat up by white thugs, spray-painted white, and in 1993, and baptized in that word. When the animated, teaching tolerance video was made, they used that word in the same way that it was reported to them in the police report. However, when it was done as a children's text, as a children's book, the word was taken out, and instead of saying the kids were baptized by this word, they said they were baptized by the word mud people. Then I started looking at the newspapers that used the account of the word and started looking at media policies in terms of when the word had to be used or when things were bleeped out. And what it made me see is that in that particular moment, to somehow reference in the media that the kids were attacked with racial epithets didn't quite convey the reality of that situation. And what I'm saying is that historically and contextually, it may be appropriate to use that word. A rap song is not historically and necessarily contextually. If you're going to start trying to switch the word, the N word, for the word slave in Huckleberry Finn, then you're denying some of the historic authenticity of that text and of that moment. So I'm not convinced that black people, young or old, don't know that that word comes with baggage that has not been unpacked in a way that people fully understand the gravity of it. And all this bit about nuance and changing the spellings and all of that stuff, I haven't quite been able to understand that fully. Because when I look at some of those minstrel songs of the 1800s, I see that word, and I see it spelled in those different configurations that have allegedly meant that black people have taken it back and given it a different meaning.
Back to young people, Professor, did I hear you say, Professor Lester, that there was a distinction geographically? I heard you mention young people in Mississippi. Was there a difference from there and other places?
Well, the survey just happened to be taken there with Merle Evers and one of the newspapers there, the Clarion Legend, and they reported the results of that survey. I imagine it can be taken any number of places. I don't think that young people today are necessarily not showered on by the sort of racist environment of parents, of grandparents, of neighbors. There's a very, very clear conservative political movement since Obama has been elected, and that's when my work on the N-word started in earnest. Is when I started seeing all the attacks on him and all the 2012 "don't renege." I mean, those are the kinds of things that are not relegated to young or old. It's what's happening right now.
Don't renege. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. We are pleased to continue. Those of you on the line, please hold, because we're going to go over and take this. And we're being joined on our panel by a good friend, Professor Kwesi Harris, who is the director of the African American Male Resource Center at Chicago State University. Professor Harris, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic,
Good.
Governor. How you feeling?
I'm doing fine. You stay with us. We'll be back, and you'll be joining, of course, Professor Anderson and Professor Lester. We'll be back.
Indeed.
We'll be back with more calls. Stay with us. We are going to continue our cliffhanger roundtable about the N-word, and we have been talking with, of course, Professor Neal Lester and Professor Lavelle Anderson. We are now joined by Professor Kwesi Harris. And Kwesi, I'm going to let you say something. Give us your take on this. You know what we're talking about before we take some more calls. Go right ahead, please.
Well, I mean, real quick, when you talk about is it a question of is the N-word more powerful than us identifying ourselves as black? I personally believe I take black any day over the N-word, and just to recognize the fact that words have power. And, too often we have people uttering words and don't have the historical context nor the content of what the word really exemplifies in a people's culture. I think a lot of times some people value our own humanity when we begin to articulate words that have, demoralizing and dehumanizing connotations. So, irrespective of Paula Dean, I'm more in line with us having a conversation among the family about how do we begin to articulate words of praise, words of uplift, words of power to one another without dehumanizing ourselves or losing our humanity.
Yeah, and the professors, your other colleagues here mentioned the fact, there's been a mock funeral about burying the N-word.
Yes.
Remember that? And on a headstone and coffin and flowers, and both Reverends Jackson and Sharpton challenged the entertainment industry to stop using the slur. And what did the industry do? They just blew them off and kept churning out the lyrics that spew the N-word and a host of other obscenities, that are just as bad.
And then he was caught saying it too on a live mic about Obama.
Yeah.
So this has got to be about self-reflecting and self-checking within the communities.
Excellent point. Excellent point. So let's see if we can get in one more quick call before we go to the break. Who's up next? It's Torrance. Torrance is up next. Torrance, how are you? We've got about 3 minutes.
I'm doing well,
break.
Cliff.
Good.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for taking my call, man.
Thanks
I really like the War selection, man. War was a dynamic group, man.
Okay.
Real quickly, I'm 51 years old, and the use of the N-word has had multiple applications ever since I've heard it. Just like the color green, and I'm just using this as an example. Green can be used a number of different ways, okay? Now, I don't hear any other ethnic group referring to themselves by using derogatory language as the way that we have, but I think we do it in a way because it's a part of our culture, and our culture was to employ a twist to how we utilize words. That's what made us, poetic in a sense. And in my opinion, I think that we've become a little bit too sensitive. I mean, there are a lot more issues out here that are much more important to affecting our mindset and our livelihood than how the use of the N-word is being played. Now, I understand and I can appreciate. In fact, I agree with your members of your round table. It's just that when I've heard the N-word and turned around and it was two white boys, okay? I've heard and they're talking to themselves, but they're using it in a way in which it has been commonly used within our community, one of appreciation. Same thing. I'm turning around here, say Spanish, calling, hey, my ning, you okay? And they're using it out of love. So, again, I can appreciate, what the steps that are being taken and in the conversation, too, and I really appreciated the last comment that one of your board members, one of your roundtable members said when, you turn on the TV and you look at the comic views, I mean, every other word that they come out of their mouth is a curse word, is derogatory. So, again, I appreciate it. I'm just saying that the reality of it all is also that, again, our culture has employed another use of it.
Torrance, thank you so much.